Hi there, and welcome to One Idea Away, not just a podcast, but a community and ongoing conversation meant to inspire and empower individuals to live more fully, deeply, and consciously. Let's jump into today's episode right now. Blaise Pascal once said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." How true this is. What is it about being in silence that troubles us so? Now, I know that after a hard day at work or a busy day with a young family or whatever it is for you, we can relish a little peace and quiet. But do we really sit in the quiet? Or do we just find passive distractions with TV or news or social media or tipping back a drink? If you are really actually able to sit, perhaps in your backyard or in a park, likely those first few minutes are peaceful, what you were looking for. So now let's fast forward 10 minutes later and it's still silent. How about 25 minutes later and you're still in silence? Are you even still sitting where you were, or are you fidgeting, moving around? What is it that happens where our minds just start going, our emotions start to come up based on whatever story or situation happens to be running around our minds? And what about that to-do list that you didn't fully complete today? Now you're feeling like you're behind, or maybe you're ruminating on what your boss or your ex or your spouse said or did to you last. You know, it's really incredible because silence is a really interesting and insightful and powerful teacher. And what you find is that even in silence, there really isn't necessarily a whole lot of stillness, but there can be. And there can be tremendous insight, as I said, and tremendous growth and even connection in silence. And that's a big part of what our conversation is going to focus on today, along with a little nudge to encourage everybody to step a little bit outside your comfort zones so that you can become more of who you really are. So what prompted our focus today is Jennifer Howard and her debut memoir that I ran across called Sit, Walk, Don't Talk, How I Survived a Silent Meditation Retreat, which was published by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh's publishing company, Parallax Press. Jennifer Howard is an author, editor, indie filmmaker, and certified mindfulness facilitator through UCLA. Her posts on mindful living can be found on the Huffington Post, Elephant Journal, as well as her own blog and media channels. She's the co-founder of the Eastside Mindfulness Collective in Los Angeles, which is a collective of like-hearted individuals building a grassroots, secular, mindfulness-based community. Sounds good to me. With that, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on One Idea Away.
Hi, Luke. Thanks so much for having me.
Cool. Before we dive into the silence portion that I do want to spend some time discussing, part of what I was hoping we could spend a little time on and help our listeners accomplish today is something I know that you've written about. It was actually a post that you had put out there, not specifically from the book, which is what we'll get to in a few moments. But I'm hoping that we can help some people come out of the spiritual closet, as you say. And so I'm just curious, seriously, a few questions on this. What do you think it is that seems that people are kind of quietly spiritual? They're like hesitate to talk or share too much about the spirituality that they've found.
Well, I mean, I can really only speak for myself.
Sure.
And I think for me, it was because I had very preconceived notions of what a spiritual person was, kind of judgmental thoughts about that. And a lot of that is because of what I've seen in the media and how folks are portrayed. And that's, there's a difference also between kind of spiritual and what that person looks like in my mind, and then religious, right? And I think often the two get collapsed. And I grew up in a situation where I saw a lot of people who were religious acting in ways that were not in alignment with the things that they were preaching about. So I developed very early on kind of a knee-jerk reaction to anything that was organized in the religion area. And I was like, well, that's, it's hypocritical, so that's not for me. And then, growing up on the East Coast, the idea of spiritual kind of very judgmental at that time idea was of someone who was kind of hippie, really out there. And that was definitely, not something that I connected with either. So at that point I was kind of like, well, I guess I'm nothing. I don't see where I can fit in either of those kind of pictures.
Yeah, it is amazing the conceptions that we have because of maybe how we grew up, some of what we've seen in the generational changes that have gone in there. I think that image of what's spirituality, what's religion, how does that all look, how does that play out in today's world? I think certainly is something that we wrestle with. There's a term that you've used, and I've seen it pop up more often recently, of secular spirituality. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what do you mean when you use that phrase of secular spirituality?
Well, again, when I was trying to get to a place where I could find something that I felt personally connected to, there really wasn't anything out there that fit for me. Although I knew that there was something that I was connected to that was greater than myself. And again, the language just wasn't there for me. And I poked around and I did a lot of research. And I think I came across somewhere, I can't really remember specifically where I came across secular spirituality, but it kind of clicked for me. And I was like, okay, I think this feels more grounded, feels more pragmatic, which is kind of my tendency. And it feels more accessible, I guess, is the big word that came to me. And I think, the way that I define it is that, again, it's a connection to something greater than self, but it is not through any specific religion, and it is more through the practical daily living and the connection that I feel with people and the world around me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the only thing I would even add to that, because I think that was very, very well put, is this idea, and I think you were just going there, is this idea of personal experience, where we're searching for this personal experience, personal relationship with what this sense of the bigger thing is that we're connected to, whatever your term for that happens to be. And it is this sense of how we really want to understand ourselves. What is the experience that we want to be able to foster? And it seems to me that it's more direct experience. It's not the idea of being through something, whether that be an institution or an organization or some form of dogma or otherwise. It's sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree 100% with exactly what you said. It's absolutely, I don't want to be told by anybody how I should be, right? I want to experience it myself and realize it through that. Yeah. And that's my path.
And, so for everyone, I wanted to kick off with this a little bit today because this honestly is a part of what this show does, right? Is we have a certain secular spirituality, meaning that we are getting connected to something a little bit bigger. It is about bringing out more and more of our best self, however you want to term that. And it is reflecting on these types of principles that some might consider philosophical, some might consider spiritual, and bring this out. And I think what I'm finding, and Jennifer, I think you're finding this within, even creating a community and working to create a community yourself, it seems like there are more people that are moving in this direction right now than has been there before. And what I just want to encourage everybody to do is the more that we begin to incorporate or discuss these experiences, some of these practices, some of the things that we're growing and learning through, I think you might be surprised at how quickly people start taking you up on that conversation. At least that's been my sense of what I've seen more recreately. And I'm guessing, Jennifer, for you too.
Yes, absolutely. I created or co-created a secular mindfulness community, and it's called the Eastside Mindfulness Collective. And I co-created it because I was looking around for other people like myself in more of an organized but not like super organized way who felt similarly, and I couldn't find it. Yeah. And I was like, but there have to be more people like me out there who are like, who are craving this kind of, meaningful, nutritious connection and substantive conversations with other people that don't take place at a church. Yeah. Right. And I was lucky to find another mindfulness teacher, and she and I kind of came together and started offering things, and people just came out of the woodwork. People just started really showing up, and they're like, we haven't seen spaces like this before, and thank you for creating this. So yes, absolutely. And more than ever, because we're so disconnected, because so much of our lives are spent online, we are actually really disconnected, you know, person to person in that way. And so, yes, I think the more that we can talk about coming out of the spiritual closet, I think, I have had nothing but positive response from that. Not one negative response.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I mean, it's interesting because it's very similar to the things that we do here with One Idea Way, not just the podcast, but things that we do as a community and things like that. So there's something brewing out there. That's what I wanted to bring everybody's attention to. There's something brewing. Pay attention and kind of get involved. We're going to talk more about community in a little bit. But what I did want to pivot to is, you know, from the book, I think you just tell it just a wonderful, wonderful tale of silent meditation. It really is. I've resonated with so much of it. However, where I wanted to begin with this is that you did this for your 40th birthday. Now, most people think, you know, the big birthday, right? People choose to celebrate it. They want to go do something big, or they want to, and you go to a silent meditation retreat for 9 days. What prompted that?
It might be an odd choice to some, but I was at a place in my life where I knew I was on the brink of a turning point, and I needed to connect with myself in a way that I had never done in my life. And I needed space to be held for me to do that, because I didn't really know how to do that for myself. And that really is a large part of what prompted me to go on that retreat.
So you get to the retreat center, and you are easing in, if there is such a thing as easing into a silent meditation retreat. Tell us a little bit about that. You know, the first session to the first day and a half of what you begin to experience, because you had never done anything like this before, correct?
Yeah, I had been on a 5-day retreat before the 9-day, and I had done a couple of weekend retreats, but yeah, this was different. This was definitely different. And the first few days, I would say pain is like the big thing that showed up. Yeah, big time.
And in what sense? When you say pain?
Oh gosh. Every sense of the word, physically, emotionally, you know, it's just everything. Yeah. I mentioned, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but no spoiler alert here, but I wake up on the first morning with something really wrong. Yeah. And if you read the book, you can find out what that is. And so I was dealing with a tremendous amount of physical pain. Yeah. And that then triggered a tremendous amount of emotional pain. And I was able to see the connection between the two very, very clearly. I was shown that without a doubt.
It's one of the things that I'm not sure if you directly talked about this, but that's one of the things I think is interesting through meditation, but specifically how much we would experience this, and you do experience this with a silent meditation retreat, is that difference between kind of that primary pain or secondary pain. Right. So primary pain being that physical, which is exactly what you describe, and then getting into that secondary pain, which is this story and the emotions and the judgments and everything that just comes and piles on top. And it creates this whole other secondary drama. Yes.
I think there's a phrase, something to the extent of pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Yes, exactly. So what do you find with some of the stuff? Give everybody a sense, I guess. First, what is the sense of for those who've never done a silent meditation retreat before? What truly does it look like? Is it sitting in a room for 8-9 hours with total silence, or what does it look like? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about what does the mind end up doing when you're in that state.
Yes, well, it looks different depending upon the style that you're sitting in. I was attending a Vipassana or insight meditation retreat, and that there's even difference in those as well. I went to one that was given through Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Northern California. Other folks might be more familiar with the Goenka 10-day silent retreats. I'm not sure they call them retreats. I think they call them courses,
right?
Vipassana courses. And so, there's a difference between that and what I went to and wrote about in the book. The Goenka retreat, which I actually just did my first one last year, is a much stricter kind of space, and you have a little bit more freedom and lenience in the Spirit Rock style. And so in the Spirit Rock style, you basically wake up, usually around 4:30 in the morning, and you go to a meditation hall and you sit with the rest of the retreatants. And it's usually a sit between 45 minutes. And then you alternate between sitting and walking periods of the same length, with breaks for lunch or for breakfast and lunch, and usually a light snackish kind of meal for dinner. And then you go to bed at about 9:30 or so. So it's incredibly long and taxing and very repetitive. And you do that every day, basically, for however long you're there.
So now, before we get to why we would do this to ourselves, let's talk about that one next form of torture that comes up, which is the mind. And so what begin when you get into that type of really, truly profound silence where it is truly about your inner world at this point? What did you experience? What is it that the mind begins to do?
Well, in my case, I've been blessed with a beautifully judgmental mind that I was very clearly shown in that container. And so a lot of judgments would pop up left and right about myself, about other people, about the food, about this, about that. And you can read about all of them in the book because I do share them. So a lot of really nasty stuff shows up for a lot of people. As I say, I'm not sure, are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
You can.
I call it my shit.
Yep.
My shit pops up. It's just all that stuff that, all the kind of hurt pieces of self that were never taken care of and were never shown love and compassion kind of pop out, and they're right in your face, and you have no escape. As you mentioned in your intro, we can't go grab a beer or watch Netflix or get on Facebook to distract ourselves from these thoughts, which is what we normally do. And here they are. They're right in front of us, so we must face them. And thankfully, I had a little bit of a practice under my belt going into this, so I was able to see the thoughts and the judgments for what they were. Eventually, I would get caught in them at first, but then pretty soon after be like, oh, wait a minute, look at what's happening. I'm judging. Okay, let me drop that and let me bring my focus back to something that is wiser.
What I think you realize is that this show is about beginning a conversation. That's why from week to week, we're sharing the stories and insights, the wisdom and the practices that come out of these interviews and these extraordinary guests, because it's about how do we move that forward. So how do we continue that conversation, specifically to see how this can make a meaningful difference in our lives and in our relationships and within our careers. This is about taking it forward, not allowing these episodes to just be a moment in time, but to allow them to really, truly begin to affect your life. And so I want to invite you to join One Idea Away. And don't worry, the membership is free. Just go to oneideaaway.com/join. You see, when you do that, you're going to get access to a couple of things. First is that every single week you will get that correspondence, the email from us to let you know what's going on. But in it, I share different personal stories and insights, things that are going on for me on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. And so you're going to start to glean some things that are maybe some behind the scenes stuff that's going on with the show. You're going to hear a little bit more of some of the work that I've even done with my clients that I'm now exposing through these emails and these newsletters. And what it's also attached to is kind of number 2, which is that we're releasing these weekly momentum builders, these connection exercises that allow you to take these concepts, these practices, some of the lessons you learn on on this show as well, and apply them to your life, to take them deeper, to reflect on them more deeply than ever before, so it does make that meaningful difference. What you're also going to do is get an invite to our private Facebook group. We're the whole community of One Idea Away, so the listeners of this show, as well as the contributors we have on our website, all of the members that we've got as part of this community, continue this conversation on that day-to-day and week-to-week basis, including offering support to one another. You'll get invited to that group. You can also find that group by just searching up One Idea Away Community on Facebook, and look specifically for the private group. The last thing you're going to do is that when you join, you're going to continually get these invites to the monthly live cast that we've also begun. These are deeper conversations where we get into it with community members, we get into it with experts, and we move the conversation forward from multiple directions on different topics, whether it be on purpose or relationships or career or meaning. And we really dive that down deep, and you've got the chance to interact by posing your questions to us. Throw it in there through Facebook and make sure that we are helping you in a way that really benefits your life, benefits your career and your relationships. And so do me a favor, go to oneideaway.com/join. I really invite you to get involved. And last but not least, do it because I would love to connect with you. It's so meaningful for me to know how this is touching you, how this is reaching you, and also what would help you even more. So do me a favor, join in, join that private Facebook group, get in touch with me, ask me your questions, and I would love to continue to support you through this show, as well as through the One Idea Away community. Thanks so much, and now I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. So how do we end up going from that place, that place where our mind is just, it's racing, it's judging, it's trying to attach to the next thing, whatever it happens to be, and to what you described before, which was this sense of reconnection to a deeper sense of self? What transpires, what transforms, what allows us to go from this really busy, cluttered space to this very different place of connection?
Recognizing that we're in the cluttered space. Once we recognize that, then we're able to actually distance ourselves from it and respond to it instead of get caught and react to it. Mm. And in creating that space, that's where the response comes. That's where the choice exists, as opposed to just getting swept away by it.
You know, it's interesting because I recognize both the choice that you get the choices you get presented with when you enter into that space. And I'm curious if you've had this experience as well, which is that the other thing is that when you find that space, there is a quiet or a stillness that's there. And it's almost like you start to hear a deeper or an inner voice, an inner sense that usually is too crowded out for us to listen to.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly. That is where I believe, that's in that space is exactly why I think they call it insight meditation, because that's where that true self, that higher self, however you want to look at it, bubbles up, is able to come up, and you can actually hear it because it's not drowned out by all the shit. Yeah.
And in the memoir, I mean, you shared a variety of insights that came to you throughout the course of these 9 days. What was one that really just very much stood out to you as a deep takeaway, a deep insight from that time there that really then, helped you maybe integrate it differently into your life, or integrate into your life a bit in a different direction?
To be honest with you, Luke, it's been a while since I was on that retreat, and I don't really remember, to be honest, like one that stands out to me now. I'd have to reread my book, which I haven't done in a little while.
Well, I will share one then. I will share one that you put out there, and I think it was earlier on, which was to me very insightful, and something that we very much do lose sight of, is how much others reflect back to us parts of who we are. And right, whether it's them doing something that we go, oh man, we start judging it and realize, oh wait, we do the same thing. Or we recognize something in them, and that actually brings something out positively in us. Part of us maybe that we didn't even recognize that we had, but once we saw it in others, we could then see it in ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. I had a couple of instances on that retreat where I recognized myself in others, and how harshly I'd been judging them, and how harshly I judged myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that because we are so good at the perpetual distractions that we can put around us, we really, truly just don't recognize how much judgment we put on ourselves. We don't recognize how much judgment we put out there just into the world and onto others, and how much that impacts our experience, and how much that creates kind of a spiral effect, a cycle, as it were, that really continues to keep it pervasive within our lives. And this is the type of thing that very much disrupts that. So
absolutely, and it disconnects us from not only other people but ourselves as well.
Well, and go a little further on that, because I think one of the things I wanted to pose out to everybody was what's a reason? What would you say if somebody has ever had even the slightest of inkling of going away, maybe not on a 9-day retreat, but maybe starting with one of the weekends or a 5-day or something like that? What would be, kind of your perspective? What wisdom would you share for them in terms of here's why you may really want to consider this?
To connect with yourself, to really just to give yourself the space to really see who and experience who you are with everything else stripped away at the bare core. Now, some people might be afraid of that.
Yeah.
And truth be told, a lot of the stuff that comes up is really hard to see. It wasn't easy for me to recognize how judgmental I was.
Yeah.
But I had to recognize that first in order to change it.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's one of those things that it feels like, and again, meditation can do this alone. It doesn't have to be a full silent meditation retreat, but it's one of those things that's amazing is how much it feels like you are holding up mirrors in every direction you look, right? It just keeps bouncing right back to you. So, one of the things, and I guess actually, if you could just speak on this, and then I want to talk a little bit about a couple of other things that I know you speak on. But one of the other things that you also talk about is that if you don't necessarily go away, or you can't necessarily go away, this is something that you can even bring into your home. You can bring this into a home practice. And I'm just wondering if you could just say a few words of that idea of kind of creating your own, silent meditation retreat at home.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's some tips in the back of the book. There's several appendices in the back of the book, and one of which is, how to kind of create the space for yourself at home. If you don't have the resources or the time to get away for a fair amount of time, you can do it for a couple of hours. You can do it for a day. You can do it for a weekend. And it's really about defining the space, getting real clarity about, I'm doing it from this time to this time. I am not going to have my phone on or even in the same room with me. I'm going to keep all electronic devices off. Making a list of the things that you want to do to create that container for yourself. And then it's up to you to actually enforce that container. Mm-hmm. And that might mean you need to tell people, if you have roommates, hey, I'm going to be in my room. Mm-hmm. I'm probably not going to be looking around out in the living room at TV or even talking with you. Please don't think it's strange. I'm just giving myself some space to be with myself, and I'm okay. And I'll let you know if I'm not okay. Because some people, around you might be like, what the heck are you doing? So it's important to kind of normalize, like, this is what I'm doing. And this is why I'm doing it, because it's really important to me to just spend some time with myself in silence. And so there are, a variety of different ways that you can go about doing that, but that's kind of a good start.
It is. And it's, the idea of just the preparing of the space, but also preparing the environment around you, like you said, whether it's roommates or family or what have you, it begins to set that space to hold that container that you want to be in. And this is, again, for everybody, this is something that while a lot of different things, thoughts, emotions, ideas will start to come up, so will the insights, and so will this space that will open up that will allow you to connect more deeply. And believe me, once you've connected to that space, even just once, you'll understand. you'll get it.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and with that, because that's kind of one of the results, as it were, that we benefit from, part of one of the joys of meditation, prolonged meditation, things like that. Things that I know that you speak on, which is, I think, a really important topic in today's times, is this idea of being in process. So for everybody, we've got a culture that is really, really focused on the idea of, well, what's the result? What's the payoff? What's the return on investment? And it really is focused on that side of things. But Jennifer, I was hoping you could speak to this other side of what does it really mean, the importance of being in process.
Yes, absolutely. I do a lot of creative work, and actually with this book, the original version of this book is I wrote this book and actually self-published it first. And then it was picked up by Parallax Press. And when I wrote the book, I didn't care at all about the end result. Yeah. The whole point of it was to, number one, process what I had gone through. Number two, share it with other people like my friends who were curious about the experience and who I knew would be interested in the insights that I had learned. And then number three, to teach myself the process of self-publishing a book and to empower myself in that. And, I knew at the end of it, I was going to have a result, a book. But I was absolutely 0% attached to what happened to that book. Me just finishing it was going to be the end all be all. And what's interesting to me is, I went through the process and I paid such dedicated attention to the process and because of that, enjoyed it so much. And at the end, when I released it, when I self-published it, it actually started to get traction. And then it got picked up by a traditional publisher. And I had definitely in the years prior to this spent many a year trying to get something published or some movie made or bought or blah, blah, blah. And so I was so focused on the results that I paid very little attention to the process. And and I never really got anywhere. And so it's not, does not go unnoticed to me that because I spent so much time on the process and so much care on the process, that the result took care of itself.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I'm curious maybe for your perspective on this, because it seems like that's such a tough line at times to juggle or to walk that line of, we want to stay in process, and yet that idea of being unattached to the result is something that seems so foreign, right? Of, well, we've got to do this, and we've got to get this done, or we've got to get that accomplished or this achieved. How do you maintain that? How do you maintain that perspective of, trusting the process? I'm where I need to be right now.
Well, specifically, I have to divorce it from money and expectation, so I've decided with my creative work, at least where I'm at right now, that I need to make something first, and then if it sells, great. But it's not as pleasurable of an experience for me to have someone say, hey, here's money, I'm going to pay you to write this thing. Because then all of a sudden there's expectation there. And then it becomes about the result. It's not about the process anymore for me.
Yeah. I think it's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, I noticed it specifically too, like when my book got picked up, all of a sudden there were these expectations attached to it now. And I had some rewriting to do, and I had some other things to do, and the process of it was not as fun for me. Yeah. Because I had all these expectations about what the result needed to be. So it's a very fascinating topic to me, actually.
It's really interesting because this idea of being in process, and I've heard this distinguished even as the difference between that results mindset or a mastery mindset, because the mastery is really truly that focus on the process, because of the results will more likely than not be there. And in moving into that type of space of being able to focus in on the process, I seem to hear that more and more as the way for creatives, for, for authors, for filmmakers, for artists and painters and drawing, all this type of work, where the more that they can really stay in process, that's what leads to their greatest successes. It actually is what leads to their greatest results. And so it sounds counterintuitive, but I hear it over and over and over and over again.
It does. And honestly, I'd heard it over and over and over again too, and didn't get it until my meditation practice. Because in the meditation practice, I learned how to let go of expectation. Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to come back around to, because I think it also it speaks to this idea of it being in process, is that when we go on these journeys and when we get immersed within these processes, these different really important processes, projects within our lives that we really want to stay in and enjoy and be fulfilled by, having the right community around you to support you in that, I think is also a really kind of critical factor. It's part of, shaping that container in a different way, if we go back to that analogy. And so I'm just curious for you, you were able to find somebody else in mindfulness. You were able to co-create and co-found this organization, the Eastside Mindfulness Collective. And I was just curious if you could elaborate, go back into how you did go about doing that. Because I do think there's a lot of people that are out there that would love to surround themselves with this like-hearted community that could be really supportive. How did you do it?
Yes. Well, number one, I had to recognize that the community that I wanted didn't exist. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find it. And so I recognized, hey, okay, I guess it's up to me to create this. So how do I want to define it? And as I mentioned, I met up with this woman, Jessica Graham, who was teaching on the east side of Los Angeles, meditation, and I had filled in for her one of her classes, and that's how we met. And when we got to talking, I just realized we were really on the same page, because we were creating these spaces for people in a secular context where we could connect and go deeper on a spiritual level. But, again, it wasn't a religious thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that there weren't that many spaces like that. And I just said, hey, what do you think of the idea of joining forces where we maintain our autonomy, mm-hmm. but we help each other and we kind of build community? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. So her partner is also a mindfulness meditation teacher. Mm-hmm. And he joined as well. And we just basically said, what are we about? Okay, well, let's define ourselves. We're a collective of like-hearted individuals building a grassroots secular mindfulness-based community in Los Angeles. And we're interested in exploring secular spirituality through mindful living and learning. Mm-hmm. And let's see if there are other people out there who are wanting to do that too. And so we just started talking about it. And we started creating more events and hosting more events and making them, like donation-based so that people of all economic levels could come. Mm-hmm. And people started showing up. And then people would bring friends. And then that's just how it happened. It really just kind of evolved by, number one, deciding that the space needed to be created, defining what that space was, and then putting it out there.
And it's amazing. I think it's part of what I did want to come out of the conversation is for everybody to see when we do start talking about these things, when we do start just even putting the intention out into the world and taking some actions in that direction. This seems to be an idea. It seems to be a space that more and more people want to walk into. They do want to enter this. They do want that community. It's something that I think has been missing to a degree for a lot of people. And Jennifer, you're doing that exactly with that Eastside Mindfulness Collective. Of originally was just putting it out there. It can start really, really simply and really, really informally, and then it starts to build steam. And it sounds like that's what you guys have going now.
Yes, and the other important thing I want to emphasize for folks who are interested in doing something like this is don't be discouraged if only a couple people show up in the beginning. Yeah. If you're consistent, really, like consistency is so key. If you're consistent, if you keep doing what you say you're going to do and you do it regularly, people will continue to show up. Like when I started, I was hosting a Saturday morning sit and social, I called it, where we would meditate and I'm still doing it, but we meditate for a half an hour, and then we we talk with each other for an hour about things that matter, and over tea and cookies. Mm-hmm. And, when I started that, there were maybe 5 people, including me, for the first, mm-hmm. 6 months, then 7, then 8, mm-hmm. then 9, and then, it's been about almost a year and a half maybe now, and this place is packed now. There are over 20 people in here every week. So it's about consistency and maintaining connection to the reason why you're doing it. Again, thinking about the process, yes, and not just the results. The result will take care of itself. Just be dedicated to the process.
Exactly. And it's funny because that's exactly what I was kind of writing down as a note it's a process. And whether it's the 3 or 4 people that are there initially or even 2 people, that's fine. Remember why you're doing it. Remember your purpose was to create community. You now have 2 more people in the community than you had before the last meeting. So it's a process. Exactly. Be consistent with it. So I guess, Jennifer, just to kind of bring the conversation, fully around, maybe a kind of a bigger question for you to summarize our chat today. I'm curious, what would you consider at this point? What would you consider the greatest gift that you've received from your focus on mindfulness and meditation?
Self-knowledge, self-regulation. This is more than one, but self-knowledge, self-regulation, connection to myself, to something larger than myself, to others. All of those, I think those 3 things are like just such gifts, such gifts. My life has changed completely because of this practice. Yeah. It's such a simple thing. It's not easy, but it's such a simple thing, and it's just so powerful. So powerful.
It is truly amazing. And I actually, whether you intended it or not, those 3 things kind of even go in terms of the way that they flow, because the more that your self-knowledge blooms, the more that self-regulation kicks in, which ultimately gives way to the connection that we're all looking for. Yeah. So it's really, truly a wonderful way of framing that. Jennifer, I want to thank you for dropping in on One Idea Away today and sharing your experiences, your insights, and all that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Luke. It was my pleasure.
For everybody out there, again, that book is Sit, Walk, and Don't Talk. And I guess really the thing I'll leave you with today is just that idea of any time over the course of this next week, find time to be quiet with yourself. And whether that's through meditation or a walking meditation, even if it's a moment where you get outside, go to a park, and just take that time to be silent and take in all of the sounds and the senses and just be with yourself and be with that experience at that time. It's really, truly amazing what this opens up for us. And it really is amazing what can come from that type of steady practice with our presence, with silence, with mindfulness, with meditation. And so with that, everybody, again, I thank you for dropping in. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you really enjoyed it, do me a favor, let us know. You can keep the conversation going and send us a message on our Facebook page, which is simply One Idea Away. Go ahead and tag me in the post or even just direct messages. Also, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this episode along with someone that you believe could benefit from hearing the ideas and the messages that we got into. That's pretty much why we do this. So you can just go ahead and share it from your app or email it along, whatever works for you. The point is to share, to talk, to discuss, and keep the dialogue going, because it's in those conversations that ideas can take hold and create profound shifts in perspective. That's what allows us to live life more fully, deeply, and consciously. As always, we would love to see you post a review for the podcast in iTunes or whichever app you're using. And until next time, remember, you're never more than one idea away from a whole new reality. This is Luke Iorio and One Idea Away, signing off.